think you know 80s reggae? You don't. Not yet. The records that topped the charts, those aren't the ones we're talking about tonight. We're going deeper than that. Behind closed studio doors, past the big names, past the radio plays, there was a whole other world of music being made, albums so powerful, so raw, so ahead of their time.
You brought us down here in captivity. Feed us with your...
That the industry didn't know what to do with them. Some got shelved, some got ignored, some just quietly disappeared. But the music never died. 10 albums, 10 untold stories. One era that reggae fans will never stop talking about. The 80s gave us legends, but it also left some masterpieces in the dark. Tonight, we bring them back into the light. And by the time we reach number 1, you'll be asking yourself one question. Why did nobody tell me about this sooner?
Number 10. Freddie McGregor. Bobby Bobolin. 1980. Close your eyes for a second. It's a warm Kingston night. The air is thick. Somewhere down the road a sound system is pumping bass through a zinc fence. And this album? This album feels like a conversation with God. Deep roots. Spiritual fire. The kind of music that makes you stop whatever you're doing and just listen. Bobby Bobolin was recorded at the legendary Studio One, produced by the great coxswain Dot himself. Freddie McGregor was only in his mid-20s when he made this, but he sounds like a man who has lived 3 lifetimes. The title track is a spiritual cry, about resistance, about faith, about not bowing down to a broken system. This wasn't pop. This wasn't radio friendly. This was roots reggae at its most honest and most raw. And yet, outside of hardcore reggae circles, almost nobody knows this record exists. Here's something most people don't know. Freddie McGregor had been recording at Studio One since he was a teenager, some say as young as 10 years old, performing with the Clarendonians. By the time Bobby Bobolin came out, he had already spent over a decade in the studio learning his craft. That experience bleeds into every single note on this record. You can hear it. In 1980, the world had its ears locked onto Bob Marley and the mainstream reggae that was crossing over to rock audiences. Bobby Bobolin was the opposite of that. It wasn't trying to cross over. It wasn't trying to please anyone outside the roots faithful. Studio One also had limited international distribution at the time, which meant this masterpiece stayed hidden behind a wall that most international fans couldn't get past. That's a shame, because this album deserved to be heard by millions. But if number 10 gave you chills, number 9 is going to take you somewhere even deeper. Number 9. Burning Spear. Hail Him 1980.
Hail him for food.
If Bobby Bobolin felt like a conversation with God, this one feels like you're standing in God's house. Burning Spear, real name Winston Rodney, doesn't make music for radio. He never did. He makes music for eternity. And Hail Him is proof of that. This is spiritual, defiant, Rastafari-rooted reggae. Every track feels like a ritual. After the massive success of Marcus Garvey in the mid-70s, the world expected Burning Spear to go bigger. Instead, he went deeper. Hail Him was released on his own Burning Spear music imprint, which tells you everything about where his head was. He wasn't chasing labels. He wasn't chasing charts. He was following his own conscience. The The album is a tribute to Emperor Haile Selassie, Jah Rastafari, and every track carries that weight. It's not background music. It demands your full attention. Winston Rodney recorded this album while running his own independent label operation. Handling distribution, pressing, the whole thing himself. In an era before the internet, before social media, that was an enormous undertaking. The fact that this album exists at all is a miracle. The fact that it sounds this good is something else entirely. Completely uncommercial by design. Burning Spear didn't want mainstream attention for this one. But the consequence was that casual reggae fans simply never found it. No big label push. No radio play. No tour to support it in Europe or America. For decades, this record lived only in the collections of the true believers. And that's where it still mostly lives today, which is a loss for the rest of the world. Number 8 is where things start to get complicated. A legendary group, a forgotten album, and a sound that should have won every award going.
All right, C-Trends fam, let's keep it real. We're pouring our hearts into bringing you the best celebrity news and music deep dives. What? Check it. A massive 98% of you aren't subscribed yet. Subscribing is how you can truly support us, helping us grow and create even better content. If you're vibing with what we do, take a sec to hit that subscribe button. It's free and makes a huge difference. Plus, ring that notification bell so you never miss out. Let's flip that 98% and build this C-Trends family together. Your support is everything.
Number 8. Black Uhuru, Sinsemilla, 1980. You know the name Black Uhuru. You've probably heard Red, the album that won them a Grammy in 1985. But before Red, there was Sinsemilla. And honestly, Sinsemilla might be the better record. This is dark, hypnotic, roots-heavy reggae. Michael Rose's voice cuts through the rhythm like a knife. Sly Dunbar and Robbie Shakespeare on the rhythm section. Two of the greatest musicians reggae has ever produced. Together, they created something haunting on this record. Something that doesn't let you go. Sinsemilla was released on Island Records in 1980, and it was the first time Sly and Robbie fully locked into Black Uhuru's sound. The result is extraordinary. Michael Rose leads the vocals with an intensity that is almost uncomfortable to listen to. In the best possible way, Ducky Simpson and the late Puma Jones provide harmonies in the background that lift the whole record to another level. Three voices, one vision, pure roots power. Puma Jones, real name Sandra Jones, was actually an American-born social worker who had moved to Jamaica and become immersed in Rastafari culture. She brought a softness to Black Uhuru's sound that balanced Michael Rose's grit perfectly. Tragically, she passed away in 1990, but her voice lives forever on records like this one. Red got the Grammy. Red got the interviews. Red got the record store display stands. Sinsemilla got left behind in the conversation. That happens a lot in music. A band's most acclaimed work casts a shadow over everything before it. But if you love roots reggae and you've never sat down with Sinsemilla from start to finish, you have a treat waiting for you. This album is everything Red promised, and it came first. Coming in at number 7, a voice like no other human being on earth. A debut album that rewrote the rules of reggae forever.
Number 7, Eek-A-Mouse, Wa-Do-Dem. 1981. Nothing sounds like this. Not before it, not after it. Eek-A-Mouse, real name Ripton Joseph Hilton, arrived on this debut Greensleeves album sounding like he came from another planet entirely. Playful, strange, rhythmically free, his sing-J style and half-singing, half-DJ created its own language. This is dancehall energy wrapped in roots soul. The rhythms bounce, the vocals soar and tumble. Put this on in a room and watch what happens to people's faces. They light up every single time. Wa-Do-Dem was released on Greensleeves Records, the British label that was one of the most important homes for Jamaican music in the early 80s.
Oh, it's a surprise door. I like it.
Eek-A-Mouse had built his reputation on the live sound system circuit in Jamaica, where his unique vocal style made him impossible to ignore. This album captured that live electricity and put it on wax. The title track became a massive sound system weapon, a record that selectors across Jamaica and the UK would pull out to rock a crowd. Eek-A-Mouse is said to have got his stage name from a racehorse he liked to bet on.
I like it. All right.
The horse never won, but the name stuck, and it turned out to be one of the most memorable names in reggae history. Only in Jamaica, because Eek-A-Mouse was so unusual, mainstream audiences didn't quite know what to do with him. He was too playful for the serious roots crowd, and too roots for the pop crowd, too unique to be boxed into any category, and music industry gatekeepers have always been uncomfortable with artists they can't categorize. But that uniqueness is exactly what makes this album a treasure. There was nobody else doing this. Wa-Do-Dem is a one-of-a-kind record, and one of the most underrated debuts in reggae history. Number 6, a man who built dancehall from the inside while everybody else was still looking backwards. And an album that sat perfectly at the crossroads of two eras. Number 6, Sugar Minott, Good Thing Going.
See that girl, she does something too.
In 1981, roots reggae was still king, but something new was stirring underneath. Dancehall was coming. You could feel it in the air, and Sugar Minott was one of the men building it. This album sits right at that crossroads, warm, melodic, heartfelt. The kind of music you play on a Sunday morning when you need something that feels like home. What Lincoln, Barrington, Minott, Sugar Minott was one of the most important figures in the development of dancehall as a genre. He ran his own youth promotion sound system in Kingston and actively mentored younger artists who went on to become major names. Good Thing Going shows the softer side of that man. The Lovers rock influence, the smooth vocals, the gentle rhythms. It was recorded at a time when Sugar was at the peak of his powers, fully in command of his artistry. While recording and releasing his own music, Sugar Minott was simultaneously discovering and developing a whole new generation of Jamaican artists through his sound system work. He was an artist, a producer, a mentor, and a movement all at the same time. Very few people in reggae history wore that many hats as successfully as he did. Sugar Minott's legacy has been more celebrated in retrospect than it was at the time.
But girl,
During his career, he often existed in the shadow of bigger names, even as he was shaping the very sound those bigger names would later adopt. Good Thing Going never got the reissue treatment it deserved.
so let's get it on.
It never got pushed to international audiences the way it should have been, but put it on today, and it sounds absolutely timeless. That voice, that warmth, that soul.
But girl,
5 albums down, 5 to go. And at number 5, we're talking about a man who Bob Marley himself called his favorite singer. Think about that for a second. Number 5, Dennis Brown, Love Has Found Its Way, 1982.
In our hearts today, yeah.
Dennis Brown had a voice that could melt stone. Warm, rounded, full of emotion, every note he sang felt like it came from somewhere deep inside. Love Has Found Its Way is a lush, beautiful record. Strings, production polish, a man in full command of his gift. This is the kind of album you put on for someone you love, and it never gets old. You know, this album was released on A&M Records, a major American label, and represented Dennis Brown's most deliberate attempt to reach an international audience.
And it makes me feel so fine.
The production is fuller and more polished than his earlier work. That was a conscious decision. Lyrically, the album covers love, longing, faith, and hope. Dennis Brown in romantic mode was almost impossibly good. Bob Marley, who almost never gave out public praise, publicly named Dennis Brown as his favorite singer. When Bob Marley says that about you, people should be paying attention.
In our hearts today.
Dennis Brown began his recording career as a child. He was just 13 years old when he released his first single in the late 1960s. By the time Love Has Found Its Way came out, he had already been a professional recording artist for over a decade. The confidence and authority you hear on this record, that is what 10+ years of mastery sounds like. Here's the painful irony. The very things that should have made this album a crossover success, as the production, the A&M push, the international sound, are exactly what some reggae purists held against it. They felt he had moved too far from his roots. They said he had gone pop. That criticism was deeply unfair. Dennis Brown never lost his soul on this record, not for a single moment.
Well, baby, you made me so very happy.
And because the Roots crowd pulled back and the mainstream never fully embraced it, the album fell between two worlds and disappeared. It deserved so much better.
Love has found its way.
Number 4 is where this countdown gets serious. A group who never got their flowers. A Sly and Robbie produced record that belongs in any top 10 reggae list ever written.
Well, baby, please let me.
But first, we need to talk about something that almost nobody in reggae ever discusses openly. Number 4, the Wailing Souls, Inch Pinchers, 1983.
You are an it man. Look what you've done. It's been
Winston Pipe Matthews and Lloyd Bread McDonald had been singing together since the late 1960s. Over a decade of brotherhood, over a decade of harmony so tight, they seemed to breathe as one.
it's been just, yeah. You are an it man.
Inch Pinchers is their masterwork. Tough dancehall rhythms, conscious, heavy lyrics, and harmonies, oh, those harmonies that could genuinely make you weep. This is a sound system weapon wrapped in a roots soul, bass heavy. How emotionally devastating. Produced by Sly Dunbar and Robbie Shakespeare, Inch Pinchers arrived at a pivotal moment. The Roots era was winding down and dancehall was taking over. The Wailing Souls navigated that shift better than almost anyone. They kept their harmonies, kept their consciousness, but let the rhythms get harder, tougher, more contemporary. The result is a record that sounds ahead of its time and also timeless. Those two things rarely happen together. And think of it as a group finally getting the production budget and the team their music had always deserved. Now, earlier I told you we'd come back to something. Something that the reggae history books rarely address head-on, and this is the moment. The Wailing Souls never got their flowers, not properly, not in the way their talent deserved. And a significant part of that comes down to industry politics. In interviews over the years, both Pipe and Bread have spoken carefully, yet diplomatically, about the difficulties they faced with distribution deals, with label arrangements, with royalty situations that were never fully transparent. Now, to be clear, there are different versions of events. The music industry of the 70s and 80s was complicated for everyone, and especially complicated for Jamaican artists trying to reach international markets. Some people say certain distribution arrangements meant that records got out, but the money never came back. Others say the promotional support that was promised never fully materialized. There are different versions of the story depending on who you speak to. What is not in dispute is this. The Wailing Souls were one of the greatest harmony groups reggae has ever produced. They made records that should have made them international stars, and they ended up far less celebrated than many artists who were considerably less talented. That's an industry story as old as music itself. And Inch Pinchers, this raw, powerful, extraordinary record, is the proof of what was lost. When great music doesn't reach the people it deserves to reach, that's not just a business failure. That's a cultural tragedy. Poor distribution, label complications, the shift from roots to dancehall that left harmony groups in an awkward middle ground, all of those things played a role. But let me tell you something. But if you find this record, and I strongly urge you to find it, you will understand immediately what the world missed. The Wailing Souls deserved everything. They got very little, and that should stay with you.
You are a hit man. Oh yeah, Inch Pinchers. Look what
Number 3, a DJ who turned his own life story into the most defiant, infectious music you've ever heard, and a debut album that changed the rules of reggae forever. Number 3, Yellow Man, Mr. Yellow Man, 1982. Before people understood what Yellow Man was doing, some of them laughed. They should not have laughed. Winston Foster, Yellow Man, was born with albinism in Jamaica, a country where that condition carried serious social stigma. He grew up in an orphanage. He faced rejection on a daily basis, and he took all of that pain, every single bit of it, and turned it into the most fearless, charismatic, unstoppable music you have ever heard. Your Mr. Yellow Man was released on Greensleeves Records, the same British label that helped bring Eek-A-Mouse to wider audiences. This was Yellow Man's debut album, and it showcased everything that made him extraordinary. His flow, his timing, his wit, his unshakable confidence. As a DJ, he had a gift for rhythmic invention that put him in a category of his own. He rode rhythms with a freedom and creativity that most MCs in any genre, in any era, have never matched. By the early 1980s, Yellowman had become the most popular DJ in Jamaica at a time when being a popular Jamaican DJ meant you were one of the most celebrated entertainers on the island. He performed at Reggae Sunsplash in 1982 and essentially electrified the entire festival. People who were there still talk about it. International audiences struggled to fully receive Yellowman because his style was so rooted in Jamaican DJ culture, a world that required some cultural context to fully appreciate. Some of his lyrical content also attracted controversy, which limited his airplay in certain markets. But strip all of that away, and what you have on Mr. Yellowman is a performer operating at the absolute peak of his powers. A man who refused to be defined by how the world saw him. A man who built an empire out of defiance, and an album that proves it. 2 entries left, and number 2 is one of the founding fathers of reggae music himself, with an album from the digital era that almost nobody has heard. Number 2, Bunny Wailer, Marketplace, 1985.
Make we step up at the dance, we go rock the drum and bass and go rub.
Think about what this name means, Bunny Wailer. 1/3 of the original Wailers, one of the founding fathers of reggae music as we know it, Peter Tosh, Bob Marley, Bunny Wailer, that was the original trio.
Send a bussy man, rock with your daughter all night. Make we step.
And somehow, Marketplace, one of Bunny's most personal and ambitious albums, has almost completely disappeared from the conversation. How does that happen? How does a founding father of reggae get forgotten? By 1985, while the music world had changed dramatically, digital production had arrived, the classic roots sound was giving way to a newer, harder, more electronic dancehall aesthetic. Bunny Wailer leaned into those changes on Marketplace, but he did it without losing his roots soul. That is an incredibly difficult balance to strike. Most artists of his generation couldn't do it. Bunny did. And the result is a fascinating, a deeply personal record that bridges 2 musical eras in a way that sounds completely natural. Bunny Wailer had always been the most spiritually introspective of the 3 original Wailers. Where Bob Marley became a global icon and Peter Tosh became a political firebrand, Bunny largely retreated from the spotlight, choosing depth over fame, roots over crossover appeal. Marketplace is the sound of a man who has no interest in compromising, even when compromise might have made him richer and more famous. That integrity runs through every track on this record.
I like to see you do the cool and deadly.
Being one of the founding Wailers should have guaranteed Bunny a permanent place in the spotlight. But the reggae world had moved on by 1985. The Marley estate was controlling much of the commercial narrative around the Wailers' legacy. and Bunny, by choice and by circumstance, was not positioned to compete for mainstream attention. Marketplace was never widely distributed internationally. It never got the promotional push it needed.
The cool and deadly, deadly, deadly. The cool and deadly.
And so one of reggae's great elders made one of his finest records, and almost nobody heard it. If you have ever loved the Wailers, any of them, this album is essential listening, non-negotiable.
The cool and deadly, deadly, deadly. The cool and deadly.
One album left. Number 1, and this is the one that will make you question everything you thought you knew about reggae in the 80s. Number 1, Half Pint, Greetings, 1987. By 1987, digital dancehall was in full swing. The Slang Tang Rhythm had already changed everything 2 years earlier. Computerized rhythms were taking over the dance halls. And in that moment, right in the middle of that digital revolution, Half Pint dropped one of the most infectious, soulful, perfectly constructed reggae albums of the entire decade, sharp, alive, fizzing with energy, and packed with more personality per track than most artists manage in an entire career. Linford Andrew Joseph, Half Pint, had already scored massive hits with Greetings and Winsome before this album arrived. Both of those tracks are stone-cold classics. Full stop, no argument, but the album that carried them, Greetings, is so much more than just those 2 singles. It's a showcase for a vocalist who could ride digital rhythms with the same ease and soul as the classic Roots generation. Oh, that was not a common gift. Most artists either sounded stilted over digital productions or lost their identity in them. Half Pint lost nothing. Winsome, one of the album's biggest tracks, was reportedly inspired by a real person in Half Pint's life. Whether that's true or not, it doesn't matter. The emotion in that performance is absolutely real. You can feel it. And that authenticity is what separates a great record from a truly unforgettable one. The Half Pint was enormously popular in Jamaica in the mid to late 80s. He was a genuine star. But his international profile never quite matched the scale of his talent or his local success. The shift toward a new generation of dancehall artists in the early 90s, Shabba Ranks, Buju Banton, Beanie Man, meant that Half Pint's moment in the spotlight was relatively brief. Artists who define a specific moment in time often get left behind when that moment passes. But Greetings is not just a moment in time. It is a document of what reggae could do when it fully embraced the digital age without losing its soul. That is why it is number 1 on this list. That is why you need to hear it.